To order. Welcome to meeting number 11 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Before we do get started, just wanted to explain to everyone that last week we were having many challenges with translation. So we're just trying to ensure that hopefully that's not going to be our experience here today. But before we begin, I'd also like to ask all members and other in-person participants to consult the cards on the table for guidelines to prevent audio feedback incidents. Only use a black-approved earpiece. Keep your earpiece away from microphones at all times. And when you are not using your earpiece, place it face down on the sticker placed on the table for these purposes. Thank you all for your cooperation. Now, today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. I'd like to take a few minutes for the benefit of members and witnesses. Before speaking, please do wait until I recognize you by name. You may speak in the official language of your choice. Interpretation services are available. You have the choice of either floor, English, or French. If the interpretation is lost, please inform us immediately. In accordance with the committee's routine motion concerning connection tests for witnesses, I can assure you all that the clerk has kindly looked into that and she's run all of the tests in advance. Now, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, February 16th, 2023, the committee will commence its study of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the current human rights situation in Iran. Now I'd like to welcome our two distinguished witnesses. We're very grateful to have you both here. You have many years of advocacy under your belts, but recognize full well that you have been very busy over the course of the past 2 years. So I'd like to welcome, on behalf of the Iranian Justice Collective, Ms. Nazanin Afshinjam, who is a human rights and democracy advocate, as well as Mr. Saeed Dehkhan, who is a human rights lawyer and director of Parsi Law Collective. So you will each be provided 5 minutes for your opening remarks, after which we will open it up to questions from the members. But if you do see me holding this up, that means you really should be wrapping it up within 10 to 15 seconds. So once again, you get 5 minutes for opening remarks, and then you have to make sure that you wrap it up if it's running over. So all of that having been explained, we'll start off with Ms. Afshinjam. The floor is yours, and you have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Chair, honourable members of Parliament. On behalf of Iranian Justice Collective, a non-partisan group that echoes the voices of Iranian Canadians and freedom-loving Iranians inside Iran, I would like to thank you for this invitation to speak on this critically important issue for all Canadians, listing the IRGC on the terrorist list under the Canadian Criminal Code. As we all know, the House of Commons unanimously voted to have the IRGC proscribed twice now, once 6 years ago and again just a few weeks ago today. Today, I'd like to dispel myths about the IRGC, speak to the nature of this repressive force domestically and internationally, and hope to table some policy recommendations from our team to support making this a reality. Firstly, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is not equivalent to the Iranian army. They are two separate forces. The duty of the army, like any army, is to protect Iran's borders, sovereignty, and people. After the Islamic Revolution in 1979, a paranoid Ayatollah Khomeini, the supreme leader, created the IRGC as a counterweight to the army in case of a coup d'etat and to specifically protect and defend any threats internally or externally to his Islamic regime. In other words, suppress anyone who gets in the way of his power and expansion of extremist, jihadist, Islamist ideology. The IRGC's role has increasingly become more powerful in foreign policy and now controls over 30% of the economy. One could equate it to a large corrupt mafia group comprising 150,000 members involved in money laundering, transnational terror, selling drugs on the black market, expropriation of property, extrajudicial killings, targeted assassinations, cyber warfare, and the spread of Islamist propaganda. Being economically enmeshed with large industries, including manufacturing, shipping, and banking, finances its activities, weapons acquisitions, covert operations, and nuclear program. Internally, they exist to quell all internal dissent. Anytime you have seen video footage of women in Iran being beaten and dragged screaming into police vans because of not properly wearing a hijab, or Christians arrested for worshiping in underground churches, or Kurds being gassed, or children being executed, or peaceful protesters being intentionally shot at, blinded, raped, or tortured, that is all the acts of the IRGC and its paramilitary subgroup, the Basij. My own father was tortured and almost executed at their hands. There are no proper trials in Iran because there is no rule of law. Judges are allowed to mete out rulings based on ordained knowledge coming from God. Sham trials lasting 5 minutes, no proper legal representation, resulting in thousands of innocent political prisoners executed, and even the journalists reporting on the matters or lawyers representing them are jailed. Iran has the highest number of executions worldwide per capita, with 800 people hanged last year alone. The United Nations fact-finding mission report on Iran concluded that the violations of human rights amounted to crimes against humanity. This gender apartheid regime and the IRGC have no regard for human life. Outside of Iran, the IRGC uses other terrorist groups in the axis of resistance as their proxies to carry out terror and to expand their extremist anti-West, anti-Israeli ideology. Iran is the biggest state sponsor of terrorism, responsible for allocating billions of dollars to fund and train Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and other terrorist factions in Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and not to mention helping Assad's regime in Syria, which killed 500,000 people. They continue to foster ties with other authoritarian regimes, like Russia, providing them with drone-launched glide bombs against innocent Ukrainians. I just had lunch today with Nobel Peace Laureate from Ukraine, and she expressed this concern on behalf of the Ukrainian community as well. Please note, the regime is continuing with nuclear proliferation, with uranium enrichment at 65%, which will not only be an existential threat to Jews, but to our whole Western civilization and way of life. If we do not do something now, their terror will spread like cancer and cost us even more politically through foreign interference, economically through cyber warfare, and laundering money, and in lives through terrorism here in Canada. I'd be happy to provide specific examples for each of these three groupings. The U.S. designated the IRGC as a terrorist organization in 2019, and the EU member states seem to be headed in that direction. And we expect Canada to be in line with our closest allies and seal the deal once and for all. I have a network of 90 Iranian diaspora groups made up of legal experts and other technocrats that are at the ready to help any task force that is set up to draft a strong Iran policy to combat these security concerns and work through any impediments slowing this designation. We want to keep Canada safe. We want Magnitsky sanctions enforced to keep these regime officials out and their assets frozen, and reverse the narrative that has been established that Canada is a safe haven for these criminals while satisfying the aspirations of 80% of Iran's population who want an end to this regime and a free, secular, and democratic Iran.
Thank you very much, Ms. Afshinjam. We will now go to Mr. Dehran. You have 5 minutes as well, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Honorable members of the Foreign Affairs and International Development Committee, good afternoon. I would like to thank you for providing me this opportunity to deliver remarks regarding the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, IRGC, and current human rights situation in Iran. In my brief remarks, I would like to share my perspective and concerns and offer some recommendations. As an Iranian human rights lawyer, I have acted as counsel and represented over 130 defendants that have faced politically motivated prosecutions before the Iranian courts, as well as having represented Iranian citizens and dual nationals appearing before revolutionary courts. I can confidently state that the Iranian judiciary has no independence in such cases, and that so-called security judges presiding over these cases simply rubber stamp decisions dictated to them by organizations associated with the security apparatus, and particular the intelligence organization of IRGC. During the first decade of my legal work, the IRGC interfered in all these cases behind the scenes, and the basis for decisions rendered was never codified in judicial rules or regulation. However, starting in 2015, as the IRGC commanders assumed an even tighter control of parliamentary prosecutor, they also legislated a process that would be favorable on the security establishment by codifying in the Code of Criminal Procedure. These new regulations empowered two security and military organizations acting at the behest of the IRGC to act as judicial officials. This meant that members of the intelligence organization of the IRGC and Basij were now fully authorized to manipulate and predetermine the outcome of proceedings regarding prosecutions that occurred before revolutionary courts, Article 29 of the Code of Criminal Procedure. Following these sinister developments, I believe the entire legal and judicial framework of the Iranian court system collapsed. The Iranian court system has no semblance of justice or of judicial independence. 3 years ago, I analyzed this development in detail in an article titled Collapse of the Legal Structure, Final Crisis of a Political System, that was published by BBC. This collapse has come about because members of parliament as well as members of the Guardian Council do not represent the instance of people and do not act to safeguard what is usually referred to as the public interest. Instead, they represent the political leadership of the theoretical regime and the intent of the IRGC. Therefore, it should come as no surprise that they will legislate laws and regulations that are merely concerned with protecting the state apartness and demonstrate absolutely no regard for the public interest or the rule of law. Therefore, as we have seen in the aftermath of the women's life freedom movement, instead of implementing justice, judges merely act in accordance with the oath they have taken to protect the supreme leaders and serve the Islamic revolutions, and they will prosecute innocent protesters with the utmost courtesy and harshness. The IRGC effectively control all the political, economic, judicial, and social levers in Iran, and even cultural institutions like an octopus with multiple arms. We are witnessing the consequences of this domination in the form of gender apartheid, which complements and reinforces long existing ethnic and religious-based discriminations. In conclusion, I would like to offer the following two recommendations. One, the Canadian government should lead global efforts to recognize gender apartheid as a crime under international law, or more specifically, to codify gender apartheid as a crime against humanity. Much like a racial apartheid represented a most serious and unacceptable international crime, so does gender apartheid. The Canadian government should work with like-minded countries and allies to draft a resolution recognizing gender apartheid, just as Resolution 3068 effectively defined racial apartheid as an international offense and crime in 1973. Two, the Canadian government should target the overwhelming economic interest of the IRGC with smart sanctions so that the IRGC's security and intelligence arms are substantially weakened and their repression and implementation of gender apartheid is no longer permitted. Both these two actions are urgent and time-sensitive, and I urge you to pursue them as high priorities. Thank you for your attention and concern. I look forward to answering any question you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dehon. We now go to the members for questions. MPF, you're up first. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to both of our witnesses for your excellent testimony and for your advocacy. I'd like to begin with Madam Afshan-Jam. You provided and talked about the repression inside Iran and also alluded or spoke directly to repression outside, transnational. Can you talk more specifically about the repression here in Canada? How is it carried out? Is it done through an external terrorist group? There's been reports of up to 700 agents. Can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. Even though in April of this year the regime launched 300 missiles directly into Israel from Iranian soil, traditionally they carry out their terror through proxies or criminal gangs. They were found guilty by Argentinian courts for the 1994 bombings of a Jewish community center in Buenos Aires, killing 85 people and the embassy as well. Just a few days ago, it was reported in the news that the regime had hired top European gang who planted a bomb in the Israeli embassy in Sweden. Here in Canada, the Hells Angels gang members were hired to carry out an assassination plot against a dissident Iranian couple in Maryland, Washington, for $350,000. Eastern European gang members were also hired by the regime to assassinate a top activist in New York. Luckily, they caught the perpetrators, but for somebody like Jimmy Sharmad, a German national and U.S. resident, was not so lucky and was kidnapped and now faces the death penalty in Iran. Journalists at Iran International News Agency have also had attempted assassination plots against them, and the UK found that there were 10 foiled kidnapping or assassination plots there. CSIS also identified at least 3 Canadians on a regime target list. The IRGC was responsible, of course, you all know about the shooting down of the PS752 flight carrying 176 people, 55 of those Canadians and 30 permanent residents. I myself have been threatened numerous times that if I did not stop my activities that I would be targeted or my loved ones would. Just a few weeks ago, my organization, Iranian Justice Collective, was here on the Hill meeting with parliamentarians, and one of my colleagues, when she returned back home, she had a call from her mother, who was then passed on to an IRGC official, he had said to her if she didn't stop her activities, she would end up like the women that she's trying to defend. So we escaped Iran to feel safer here in Canada, yet we're always looking over our shoulders when we're doing speeches, when we're rallying. We're always panning the audience to see who's there. And as you mentioned, Global News did an investigative piece where they found that there were 700 IRGC affiliates, regime affiliates here in Canada, and 9 of them are set to be deported. But what we're suggesting is that instead of deporting them, we hope Canada exercises its universal jurisdiction and opens up trials against them and set an example that human rights abuses cannot go ahead with impunity.
Thank you. Thank you. You've also touched on cyber warfare. How are they doing that here?
Yes, cyber warfare is also a huge problem. It engages, it's one of the largest and most sophisticated cyber armies alongside Russia and China, costing hundreds of millions of dollars in damages to Western institutions, critical infrastructures, and high-value businesses and government agencies, including ransomware and targeting hospitals. The headline, the Globe and Mail, in August of 2023 read, "Cyber criminals in Russia and Iran will threaten Canada's security and economic prosperity, say intelligence agency and our CMP." Its cyber army is in the tens of thousands, and they're hired also to spread online propaganda, spread disinformation, and create dissent among the Iranian opposition.
Thank you. Mr. Degum suggested 2 recommendations. I know the IJC has also put forward recommendations. Do you agree with the 2 recommendations put forward by Mr. Degum? And what other recommendations might you have?
Yes, absolutely. I support the campaign to end gender apartheid in Iran. I'm actually part of a core person in a group of Iranian and Afghan activists that launched the End Gender Apartheid campaign. And what we're trying to do is expand the legal definition of apartheid to not just include race, but gender. We're trying to codify it in international law so that those that are responsible for these crimes can be prosecuted, hopefully one day in the International Criminal Court. But also symbolically, for me, this campaign isn't just about gender issues specifically. I know as parliamentarians you can't come straight out and say that you are for regime change in Iran, but you can support a campaign like ending gender apartheid. Our former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney championed ending racial apartheid in South Africa. He convinced people like Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher to have the political will to stand behind a campaign like this, and I believe we can champion the same to end gender apartheid in Iran.
Thank you. I want to get one question into Mr. Degum.
Mr. Epp,
sorry.
you only have 5 seconds left.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So sorry about that, MP Epp. So next we go to MP Zuberi. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the witnesses for being here today. And I want to thank you for your courage and strength and advocacy on this very difficult issue, which I know takes quite a toll on you personally and those around you. So just want to acknowledge that fully. And having legal training, I'd like to start off with Saeed. I'd like to start off with Saeed, please. In terms of I'd like you to elaborate more about the judicial system. And you said that you have represented 130 individuals, if I gathered correctly, both in the Iranian courts but also at the revolutionary courts. Can you talk about has there been an erosion of the justice system over the last years? And is there a distinction between these 2 courts? And about the basic principles of due process, the right to mount, a case. Can you speak about these basic principles in law as they relate to those first 2 points, please?
Let me speak Farsi for the answer in section Q&A, please. در مورد دادگاه‌های انقلاب اسلامی در جمهوری اسلامی من همونجوری که در صحبت گفتم
like to speak to the courts of Iran. The truth is that revolutionary courts in Iran, in all of the cases that I had there, you can for sure say that none of them, the revolutionary court, these are under the security judges and under the leadership, they provide an order and based on the swearing that they have done, according to what they have sworn. In the result is that none of them has to do with any of the judgments. It's all political decision. From point A, that means from the moment A, from the arrest time, it's just like kidnapping. Without any judicial system, they go to security courts, they go into these courts, and then investigators from the Sepah will interrogate them without representation, under torture. They will be admitting to certain items. It has been taken, and then the order would be in just 3 courts in the whole country. That is the revolutionary courts I am talking about.
Different, or with respect to basic principles, to what extent are they respected? And if just a succinct answer, please. And understanding that Iran is not Canada, but we still expect some semblance of process, please.
Good question.
You have to insist that these are civil courts are different from revolutionary courts. Civil courts are independent. They are specialized. Perhaps there is some sort of corrosion in there, but we are not talking about the courts there. We are talking about revolutionary court and sometimes criminal court. So the civil courts are totally different. These are when, because of the religious rules, they come into play. But I have to insist that civil courts are totally different. What I mean is just the revolutionary courts.
For our second, our second witness, you mentioned an important point where America is with respect to the IRGC. You also mentioned that the EU is looking at this. I just want to ask, in terms of, just so we can get it for the record, have any European nations yet listed the IRGC? Just for the record. So if we know this, it'll help us in our, please.
No, officially, no European country has yet listed, although the European Parliament almost unanimously, I believe, was it unanimous, called for the designation. And then Josep Borrell, the head of the European Council, said that they needed more legal proof that there was terrorism or terror on European soil. There is a lot of proof that there is. That I think it's just a political excuse. But
I understand. I just want to get one last question.
Yes.
And first off, if there's any intimidation for you personally or those around you because of this testimony, please do let us know later on. The committee. Now, in the last seconds that remain, how can we, from here, support individuals who are targeted within Iran in a way that will help people? If you have any suggestions on how we can effectively do that from here.
Well, one matter. Oh. Refugee.
نه شما کافیه که بعضی از کیسایی که در اروپا
You can just look at some of the cases in Europe from 97 Brumand Foundation. They have provided a report. Just recently, a woman was from France to Iraq, and from Iraq, this person was killed. And another one was Masih Ali-Nejad, who was, there was intention of kidnapping her, but there is enough proof.
So we now go to Mr. Bergeron. You have 6 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you so much, Chair. And I'd like to thank both our witnesses for coming today and for the work that they do on a daily basis to defend human rights in Iran. Ms. Afsanjan, in your opening remarks, you made the distinction between the Iranian army, the armed forces, and the IRGC. You said that one of the roles of the Iranian army, I'm sorry, I said it was a slip of the tongue. I said Israeli, I meant Iranian. But one of the roles of the Iranian army is to protect the population. And you said a few minutes later that the Ayatollah Khomeini had created the IRGC to be a counterweight to the army in case of a coup d'etat. Since 1979, has the Iranian army been used to protect the population? Okay, my French is a little rusty, so I'm going to continue in English, if I may.
Under the Shah, there was the Iranian army.
طبق در زمان شاه ارتش ایران وجود داشت. ارتش بعد از اون هم ادامه دار بودش و در اون حاضر یکسان بود و وظیفه ارتش
for territory and to a certain extent protect the lives of those inside Iran from, let's just say, outside war. But those that are in positions of power, generally they have some adherence to the supreme leader, to the tenets of the Islamic Republic. So I wouldn't say everybody in the Iranian army is safe or trustworthy, but definitely the core of the IRGC, their main role, their only role, is to protect the establishment of the Islamic regime. And that's why the name Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps doesn't have the word Iranian in it, you'll note, because they're not there to protect the Iranian people. They're only there to protect their regime and the expansion of this Islamist, I should say, ideology.
Vous avez appelé.
You spoke about stronger sanctions under the special economic measures regulations, and more specifically under the Magnitsky Act. To date, and these numbers go back to May 2024, in other words, only a few days ago, the RCMP says that it froze assets of a value of only about $79,000. Do you really think that this economic measures is the best way to put pressure on the Iranian regime?
But in the meantime, we should continue to sanction those that are part of this regime. We have the Canadian government has already listed a number of officials from the Islamic regime, but we definitely need to add more. In fact, the Iranian Justice Collective, we've done a new report that we have started to circulate to members of parliament from all the parties. You should be receiving it in your email in the next few days, of 20 more top officials that are part of the Iranian judiciary and the court system, and we have it listed under the words Tumaj sanctions. Tumaj, of course, is a rap artist who's become a hero inside Iran for his lyrics, his lyrics against oppression inside Iran, and he's now on death row. So we use the name of him to honor him and to use the acronym TUMAJ, which stands for Targeting Oppressive Officers to Mitigate Abuse in the Iranian Judiciary. And we've listed 20 names, although this is just 20 among so many others. And I also like to point attention to a website called facesofcrime.org, which there is an organization by the name of Justice for Iran that has created a database of regime officials. It provides their pictures, it cites their titles, what they're criminally responsible for, the types of human rights abuses that they're responsible for. And this is a real good tool for our border agencies, parliamentarians, or other security forces inside Canada, the RCMP, to refer to if there are citizens from Iran trying to come into Canada to refer to, because it lists who are those that are implicated in human rights abuses or crimes against humanity.
Nos deux témoins ont fait référence.
Both our witnesses.
That's correct.
Mon Dieu Seigneur.
Oh dear. I'll get back to my question then.
So next we go to MP Abel-Taif, but I understand.
I think maybe me.
Oh, my apologies. Madam McPherson, you have 6 minutes. The floor is yours.
So I know you're always getting mixed up.
Apologies.
I understand, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you for this important testimony. You know, the reason that I brought forward the motion to do this study in this committee is because of what we saw during the Women Life Freedom Movement, and you know the calls that I've heard from members of my community, members of the Iranian community, who've been asking for this work to be done, and your advocacy over the last number of months and years has been vital to us being able to do the work. And the goal, of course, of this study is that we find out what Canada can do, what more Canada needs to do to help support Iranian Canadians, to help support Iranians who are having their human rights taken away from them. And you spoke about the disproportionate impact on women, the gender apartheid that we see against women. Just this morning, actually, I saw online that there are political prisoners, women political prisoners in Iran that have requested that Narges Mohammadi has her trial be undertaken in public. For me, I'm interested. You talked a little bit about the use of torture, how the regime is doing things in secrecy to inflict pain and suffering on the Iranian people. In this particular situation, can you talk a little bit about why it's so important that this trial is done in public, and what that indicates for how this regime is working right now? And perhaps I would start with you, Mr. Degam.
I think the reply to your question is inside what you're saying. When a court, although there are regulations, the political and they have to be in Arabic language, yet 43 years or so after you have not seen one court that is public. It shows that when everything is done in the clandestine fashion, it is not a court. It is already decided. Narges Mohammadi is also a propaganda against the regime. This is exactly the most political accusation. Again, this is he was behind the court doors and without the jury. This shows that because of the disruption of the judicial system, this security work, and there is absolutely no relation to the Islamic Republic dues.
Inside Iran, as I said, there is no rule of law. There are no proper courts. If they're doing this, they're making an example. Basically, Narges Mohammadi, for those of you who are not aware, she is the Nobel Peace Laureate, and oftentimes these trials are kangaroo courts, so they're not proper trials, the victim is normally not given proper legal representation. And if they're going to allow this publicly, it's going to be just as a trick to the international community to try to show that there's some semblance of order. But let's not forget that oftentimes victims are forced into confessions. They're tortured behind the scenes, or they're told that their family members will be raped or killed if they testify. So it is all a circus act. I hope it is public, just so that the international community can see for themselves, but it's not to be trusted ever.
Of course, yeah. Well, and we saw that, after the horrific attack on civilians during the PS 752 downing, when they shot the innocent people and murdered them. What we saw is the intimidation that was then directed towards the families of those who'd lost their lives, which is in Canada and in Iran. You spoke as well about Toumaj, and we know he has been sentenced to death. We know that there is targeting of cultural personalities, artists, authors, folks that are representing the Iranian people, and the targeting of that is a message as well. What more should Canada be doing? We have members within Parliament. My own colleague Benita Zarrillo has been very outspoken in her support for Toumaj. But what else can we be doing to protect folks that are in these situations? But also, what does it mean to Iranian people when the cultural icons of their country are being murdered?
Question. Again, just for those of you that don't know, Toumaj is not only a prominent rap artist inside Iran and loved by most Iranians because of his art and song, but more so because of his bravery and courage in his lyrics, touching the population's hearts and minds, addressing all the social ills committed by this regime, corruption and oppression of all the citizenry. And he's become a hero, really, a larger-than-life figure inside Iran. And the regime has imprisoned him, tortured him, injected him with unknown substances, and now has a death sentence against him. There's a petition of over 500,000 people who have signed asking for the international community to pressure the Islamic regime to give him a stay of execution. And I think that's the only thing you can do as parliamentarians. When I used to run the Stop Child Executions organization, we noticed that parliamentarians who were pushing on these individual cases were the ones that were given this stay of execution. So continue saying their names, but more so enacting a price. Yes, I see enacting a price for these crimes against humanity and these abuses. So that means, by listing the IRGC and Magnitsky sanctions and just and getting more. Okay, I'm sorry. I stopped.
So we now go to MP Abultaif. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the witness and welcome to committee. I just go quickly to the question, and the question to both of you, and if you would, each one of you wants to start answering. I feel that there is a level of hesitation on moving forward when it comes to listing IRGC as a terrorist organization and to act on the move by the governments in Europe and in Canada as well. Would you be able to explain that? Is there a wisdom that we don't know? And what can you tell us? If I can start with you, Mrs. Afshin.
I wish I had that answer. In fact, that's a question that we have posed repeatedly of members of Parliament here in Canada, in the UK, in Europe, asking what is the hesitation. There are a few things that come up sometimes. One is they say that they're afraid of targeting innocent people, the forced conscripts. In Iran, adult men have to do 2 years of military service. It's mandatory. And so the question is, will innocent people be targeted if they're trying to come into Canada? And the answer is simple. those that are conscripted, at the end of their 2-year term, they're given an identity card that says the day that they enlisted and the day that they ended. If it shows that it's approximately in that 2-year mark, then one can differentiate between somebody that has served their life serving the IRGC. Also, people have the choice. When they do their military service, they can choose the Army or the IRGC. So already they're making an informed decision by choosing. Now, those that have low clerical jobs working in an office at the IRGC, again, their position is listed on the identity card. So we can bypass if that's the real concern here. But we're never given the real reason. That's why I say, please let us know what is the impediment. We have the legal experts. We have the task force that are happy to solve these matters. And if it's a question of a question of cost in terms of, getting more RCMP, more CSIS members to control this, well, you have to ask yourselves, what is the cost of a human life? Because I know it's coming here to Canada. We are already seeing assassinations happening and kidnappings, and next thing you know, we will have terrorism on Canadian soil. And then how will each one of you be able to look in the faces of the Canadian public and say, why did we not list the IRGC on the terrorist list?
Thank you. Mr. Dragan.
من فکر میکنم
I think considering that we make sure that we have to really differentiate between those who are in the army. We have no option. These are not, there is an option whether they choose the Sepah or the police or the army. When they are forced to go there, first of all, IRGC must be announced as in the list of terrorism, and then we can separate those, differentiate the other people. This is just like the Taliban's in Afghanistan, with the difference that Sepah is in the shadow of the government, which has taken over the public. So in the 90s, when in South Africa there was the apartheid was done there, this is like an octopus whose extended arm has covered the people of Iran. All we have to do is to add this one item to it. This is something that Canada has to take over, and it has happened in the history in the past.
20 seconds.
2 seconds?
20.
Okay, that's not. Thank you.
It's more than 2.
Just a quick question to Ms. Afshan Jam. Are we out of control on the IRGC activities in Canada? Do you think if we decide to act on it the way we should, do we still have the capacity, and are we going to be able to do that?
Are we going? Sorry, just
Very,
Are we
very
going
brief.
to be able to control the activities of IRGC in Canada the way we like to do? Because I think they're deep-rooted. Do you agree?
They're deeply rooted. I mean,
Please, because we're considerably over time, so if you could answer in 20 seconds. My apologies.
well, that investigative piece found that there was 700 Iranian, not Iranian, Islamic regime affiliates here. So, of course, it's among us, but we have to prevent more from coming, and we have to deport those that are that have been defined as being having committed crimes against humanity or human rights abuses.
Thank you very much. Now, first of all, I wanted to thank you both. You've done a terrific job demonstrating how horrific the human rights situation in Iran is, how unprecedented it is as well. I truly can't think of another country where a Nobel Peace Laureate languishes in jail. I can't think of another country where the most eminent lawyer actually is in jail. And I certainly can't think of another country where the most popular singer and rapper, just because he was singing songs, has been sentenced to death. So thank you for all of those explanations. Now, if I could ask a couple of quick questions from Mr. Dehan. You were saying that essentially your testimony is that the legal system is a complete and utter sham. There are no legal principles that really lead to individuals being sentenced to death. Am I correct in assuming that if you are convicted of something in Iran, there's almost no chance that you could get a lawyer of your liking to represent you?
Actually, no. The same law that the Iran is so it can say there are a lot of lawyers in jail, such as Arash Keykhosravi, Mohammad Najafi, Amir Salar Dawoodi, and Khosrow Ali Kurdi. They are in the jail. So when about this is the law. Some parliament in 2015 says that only lawyers approved by the head of judiciary can represent defendant in revolutionary courts. Therefore, they can not choose an independent lawyers of their own choice. در واقع من میخوام این توضیح رو بدم که در ایران
reality, what I want to explain, only lawyers who have been approved by the government, so they can only defend those who are against this, whereas the lawyers who are defending these people are those who have sworn into defending the government. So that's why you can see that the press and the artists are on one side. The lawyer who is defending will be incarcerated and detained itself. What it means that the government can only choose their own lawyers for the defense of those who are against the government.
Asked previously, you said the revolutionary courts are controlled by the intelligence ministry and things of that nature. But anyone who's charged with a politically motivated charge has to go through revolutionary courts, correct? So when it comes to most individuals who, for example, displayed courage, they were arrested on the streets, their cases would go to the revolutionary court, correct?
Yes, unfortunately, that is the case. Whereas 10 years ago, the political world, from 2016, this law was passed. This law, which is very unprecedented, 34, 35 years after so long, this political law was accepted, but immediately 96, 97, 98, and then the farmers of Khuzestan, and then we came to woman freedom, which were all peaceful demonstrations. Not even one file has been attended to political courts. Even Narges Mohammadi, which is not public, has gone to the revolutionary. I think that is sufficient evidence that these are only special branches, and they are conducted by judges who have no control at all, and they have only the stamp, which is the leader's decision only and only.
Pick up, Ms. Afshinjam, where you left off, that you were concerned about terrorist acts happening on Canadian soil. Why are you so concerned? What are some of the facts that you're aware of that all the members here should be familiar with as well?
As I said, there's been examples in the UK, in the United States, in Europe, of assassination plots. Like there was a member an activist in the restaurant Mykonos in Germany who was assassinated. As I said, there's been bombs at different Israeli embassies just up until a few weeks ago in Sweden, and we've had terror here in Canada, and I don't trust that. Okay, your hand is up, so that's okay. Your own question.
We're over the time. Thank you very much.
I just know it's a matter of time.
Thank you very much. We now go to Mr. Bergeron. You have 2.5 minutes, sir.
Our both witnesses have referred to gender apartheid, and this has also been raised, Mr. Jasmine Mayan, about human rights in Iran. Mr. Degan, you said that this type of apartheid supports discrimination or intersects with discrimination against religious and ethnic minorities as well. For the benefit of the members of this committee, could you please expand on that connection that you are making between the system of apartheid and discrimination against religious and ethnic minorities?
When one speaks about a regime that supports its inside its regulations in apartheid, we just talked about racial. What we suggest today about the gender in the international law, it's because it's not just the gender apartheid, racial and also minorities. We have to remember LGBTQ are their order would be execution if they are gays or lesbian. Even the Baha'is in Iran, they don't have permission to go to university. They cannot hold a job. They don't have national ID card. They cannot live in anywhere. 3-4 days ago, in one of the farms in the north of Iran, in Mazandaran, they came and they took their rices and destroyed their rice land. Although they own that land, under such conditions, it's not just a racial apartheid. It's generally the whole government is intertwined with the issue of hijab, and it's like an octopus. It's one of those crushing tools. Being from Baluchistan to Kurdistan, minorities, Baha'is, not even in their even Baha'is, that in itself is a crime, and we have to really look into it at the highest level of decisions.
Sorry about that. We now go to MP McPherson. You have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you again for your testimony to both of you. Ms. Ashvin Jam, you spoke about Iran's role in the global community. You spoke about the nuclear proliferation. I'm interested in, we know the threat that is shown within the Middle East, but I'm interested in any information you might have with regards to how Iran is working with Russia and the implications, not just in the Middle East, but also in Ukraine and around the world from that, from those connections.
Well, as we all know, all these authoritarian regimes are banding together. They share intelligence. They basically operate from the same book of repression. They share ways of how to repress their own people. Of course, financially, they help one another by buying each other's oil, et cetera, et cetera. And as I mentioned, providing drones, the regime is responsible for providing all those drones to Russia against Ukrainians. So I forgot the first part of the question was.
Just the connection there.
Yes.
I'm just trying to get your sense of that connection between Russia and Iran and what the implications of that are, I guess.
Yes, I don't have specifics. I'm not an expert in that domain, but I just know that they collaborate. All of these dictatorial regimes, their leaders, we see them meeting. They, of course, have that BRIC organization together. And we, as Western liberal democracies, need to do the same and band together with our allies. And that's why I stress so much that we need a strong Iran policy. We need a strong policy for many of these countries, but specifically that's what we're talking about here. Unless we do that, if we don't, then we're going to face the consequences. And we see it here on our campuses. I mean, a lot of the Islamist ideological propaganda coming from Iran, a lot of the funding of certain madrasas and mosques are spewing anti-Israeli hate, anti-Western hate propaganda, and they're trying to enlist people to be part of this extremism. So we need to take a stand against all kinds of extremism.
Of course, of course. Mr. Dagan, anything
I'm
from your
so
side?
sorry,
Oh,
Madam McPherson. We're out of time. We're actually
sorry.
20 seconds over. But unless you wanted to ask a question that he could do written submissions on and send it.
It's fine. It's fine,
Yeah.
Mr. Chair. I'm sure he'll.
Okay, at this point, I wanted to thank our two witnesses. That was incredibly helpful. Thank you for your expertise, for your perspective, and also thank you for your courage and conviction. And I certainly hope that things will improve in Iran. Thank you very, very much. We will now turn to the second panel. I think it's going to take 3 minutes, 2 minutes? 2 to 3 minutes, and we'll turn over to the second panel. Thank you. we will resume our hearing on the situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran. We now have a new panel. We're very, very grateful to have here with us three experts who've been working very hard over the course of the past 2 years. Here in person, we have Dr. Nima Mashouf, who is a researcher. We have in person Mr. Hamid Ismailian, who's familiar to you all, and is a board member of Flight PS 752 Association. So those two are here in person, but we're also very, very grateful to hear from two witnesses who are joining us virtually. We are grateful to have Dr. Hani Ziai, who's a political scientist and Iranologist at the Raoul Danduran Chair at UQAM, as well as Mr. Kurosh Dushanos, who is, as I indicated, also a member of the Association of Families of Flight PS 752. So we have three opening remarks, as I understand. We'll start off with Ms. Mashouf, and then, as I understand, Dr. Ismailian and Mr. Dushanos will split their time, and then we will go to Dr. Ziai. Madam Mashouf, welcome. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. Just would be grateful if all of you did look over this way every once in a while. When this goes up, that means you really should be tying it up within 10 to 15 seconds. All of that having been explained, Dr. Mashouf, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Permission, I will do my talk in French. Alors.
Thank you. Freedom of expression is the bedrock of democracy. In Iran, freedom of expression has never existed, not during the Shah's time and certainly not since the Islamic Revolution. The first victims of repression were women and the press. Today, I'd like to speak specifically about the gender apartheid, as my colleagues referred to it, that reigns in Iran. In other words, a system of systemic, institutionalized segregation of women. The obligation to wear the veil in public is only the visible part of the discrimination that is experienced in Iran. Since the establishment of the Islamic theocracy in Iran in 1979, women legally are only worth half as much as men. The woman inherits half of what the man does. In terms of legal testimony, it takes 2 women to equal the testimony of 1 man, even in the case of premeditated murder. If a man murders his daughter, he will not be punished because she belongs to him. The mother cannot apply for legal documents, for example, a passport for her children, because her signature has no legal value. Women do not have the right to be judges, so the winner of the Human Rights Award lost her position. Many sports are forbidden to women. A woman cannot study, work, or travel without her husband's permission. Polygamy is permitted for men. A man may divorce his wife at any time without condition, even if their wife is not aware of this. And the wife must convince the judge with valid reasons in order to obtain a divorce. But this partial right was only won after many, many years of struggle. After a divorce, custody of the children is entrusted to the father or other male family member unless the child is disabled. So these are only a few examples. Iranian women are resisting, and despite systemic discrimination, 60% of those in university are girls, and much to the chagrin of the authorities, women are taking up more and more of the country's social and economic space. Now, I've talked about women's rights, but human rights in general are flouted, and repression is brutal. There is no freedom of expression. The right of association does not exist. The media are censored. Access to the internet is controlled. Any protest is violently quelled. You've heard more about it since the assassination of Mahsa Amini and the Women and Freedom Uprising. In 4 months of protests, they have killed over 600 people in the streets, including around over 50 children. They've arrested tens of thousands of people. According to the Iranian government, 22,000 have been given amnesty. But that's according to the Iranian government. Many have been sentenced to death, and actually many of you took part, and we are very grateful for this, in the sponsorship campaign of the political prisoners in order to protect them from certain death. Over the past 2 years, the government has tried to disfigure the protest movement, and they have specifically targeted people's eyes in the streets. More than 500 people have lost their sight. Today, Iran is under electronic surveillance. More than 1 million women who continue to resist the regime's dictates and appear in public without the veil have received infraction notices by text message. They've had their cars confiscated. They've been given fines. They've been sent to prison, and they still carry on. Every year, the UN Special Rapporteur denounces the violation of rights in Iran. The prisons are full of prisoners of conscience. Amnesty International regularly denounces the use of torture, rape, electric shocks, mock executions, forced confessions, and arbitrary executions in Iran. In recent years, chemical torture has been added to the physical and mental torture. And strangely enough, several suicides have been recorded upon leaving from prison. So there were prisoners who left prison and then committed suicide. These same chemical weapons were used during the Women Life Freedom movement to terrorize girls' schools, and thousands of pupils were poisoned and hospitalized between January and April 2023. We're talking about minors. The Canadian Parliament has already recognized the massacres of political prisoners in the 80s as a crime against humanity. That was in 2013, when some 9,000 prisoners were executed and then thrown into mass graves. I'm talking about Ramadan. These 44 years of Islamic rule have been accompanied by 44 years of resistance. The people have tried everything: confrontation, reform, civil disobedience. Because you see, Iranian society is young, energetic, and now above all determined to put an end to this regime of terror. But we are up against a monster. I hope I will have an opportunity to answer questions so that I can speak further.
Response to your questions. We now go to Dr. Ismailian and Mr. Dushanas. You have 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members of the committee. 50 days before the downing of Flight PS752, more than 1,500 peaceful Iranian protesters were brutally murdered over a few days when the regime cut off the internet and unleashed its vicious armed forces upon people on the streets in what became known as the Bloody November Massacre. The Bruman Foundation reports that over the past 45 years, more than 540 cases of assassinations and bombings have been carried out around the world by the Islamic regime through the IRGC. Over the past decades, this nefarious organization has become a source of terror for Iranians and much of the world. When we speak of the IRGC, we are referring to a vast nefarious military organization that has a stranglehold on all of Iran's resources, from mines to airports, from the film industry to sports, trading ports, factories, the bazaar, currency trade, to even a monopoly on provincial governorship posts. A monstrous entity that has no mercy on teachers, workers, artists, and ordinary citizens, persecuting, imprisoning, torturing, raping, and murdering with impunity to disrupt civil society and destroy any efforts by the people to organize peaceful resistance. The beautiful young Iranian woman Mahsa Jina Amini's murder opened a new chapter in the book of crimes against humanity by the Islamic regime. During the Women Life Freedom Revolution in 2022, when tens of thousands took the streets in Iran and around the world, the United Nations Fact-Finding Committee reported at least 551 killings by IRGC forces. Many of the victims were children and youth who were horrifically murdered around the country. Baluchistan, Kurdistan, Mazandaran, and Tehran have suffered the highest casualties during the recent uprising. In only one day, at least 104 citizens were murdered by the IRGC in Baluchistan. Over 130 citizens were blinded by shots to the face. Tumaj Salehi, the famous Iranian rapper, and many other young Iranian protesters are currently under threat of execution. Many activists are in prison around the country. So far, many young protesters have been executed, while thousands have been arrested and suffer under extreme prison conditions. Only in the last year, the Islamic regime has executed 798 citizens without any accountability towards the people of Iran or the international community. All of these atrocities emanate from the top echelons of power in the Islamic regime that is concentrated in the IRGC. This nefarious organization is not only a menace to Iranian society on all levels, but a threat to the security of the entire Middle East and the world. Calling the IRGC what it truly is and officially declaring it as a terrorist organization is an urgent, necessary action that must be taken without delay in Canada and the rest of the free world. The families of Flight PS752 Victims Association stand with all the survivors of the victims of this brutal organization in making this demand. So I pass to Mr. Dushans now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ismailian. Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may, on January 8, 2020, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard launched missile attacks against Ukrainian flight PS752 shortly after takeoff from the Tehran International Airport. 177 innocent passengers and the crew, including the unborn child, many of whom were destined for Canada, lost their lives in the terrifying attack in southwestern Tehran. The missiles attacked against the flight PS752 were not the first nor the last of heinous crimes committed by IRGC against Iranian Canadians. A few years earlier, Iranian-Canadian photojournalist Zahra Kazemi and environmentalist Kavus Sayed Emami were murdered by the Islamic regime and the IRGC. The families of the PS752 victims have suffered persecution, threats, and inhumane treatment by the Islamic regime over the last 5 years. The UN Human Rights Watch has reported escalation in torture and mistreatment of families of victims in Iran. Last October, Mrs. Zarabi, who lost 4 of her loved ones in the dawning of flight PS752, attended the funeral of a young woman named Armita Gravan, who was murdered by the regime. Mrs. Zarabi was arrested and severely assaulted before being dragged on the ground to custody. A mourning mother of another victim was brutally beaten by IRGC forces at her child's grave site. Some PS752 families have been banned from leaving Iran to attend the anniversary ceremonies of flight PS752 victims in Toronto. There are many instances of prosecution, threats, and arrest, even some kidnapping during the anniversary ceremonies that families hold in Iran under the severe security conditions. In the aftermath of the dawning of flight PS752, the victim's family and activists believe that there has been much ambiguity in the Canadian government's position towards IRGC. On the 4th anniversary of the dawning of flight PS752, we heard from our Prime Minister that he will take the necessary measures in this regard. 7 months remain until the 5th anniversary of the dawning, and we all know that the association expects a clear and swift response to our demand. We believe that since Canada has suffered most from the actions of IRGC outside of Iran, it must be the first country to officially put the IRGC on the list of terrorist organizations. We hope that this will happen without any further delay. Thank you kindly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Duchenas. So now we start with the questions from the members. No, my apologies. Yes, we have one more witness. Dr. Ziai is joining us virtually. My apologies for that. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. Thank you, Dr. Ziai.
Monsieur le Président, est-ce que...
Members of the committee, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today about the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in Iran and the current situation. There is a mic on in the room. The interpreter must interrupt interpretation.
En Iran. À travers mes recherches,
through my research into the ideological political system of the Islamic Republic of Iran, it is clear that the regime's legitimacy is being significantly eroded. This is illustrated by recurrent protest movements, systematic contestation, and increasing absenteeism at elections. For example, the legislative elections held on March 1st, 2024 saw a turnout of just 41%, the lowest since the establishment of the Islamic Republic in 1979. Or the euphoric reaction to the announcement of President Raisi's death, which is indicative of the state of mind of a significant proportion of the Iranian population. A sense of relief and joy highlighted the deep-seated opposition and accumulated exasperation with the regime perceived as oppressive, authoritarian, and illegitimate. This lack of political legitimacy profoundly weakens the authority of any regime, even a non-democratic one, and it forms an essential basis for assessing its stability and acceptability to the people, in this case, the Iranian people. Iran is currently governed by a political system considered by part of its population as anachronistic. The Islamic Republic of Iran presents itself as a theocracy, while the country's women and young people aspire to a clear separation between the religious and political spheres. Even non-democratic regimes have to rely on a legitimate and legal basis to maintain their power. But how is this regime legitimate in the eyes of the Iranian people? And we have heard several testimonies to that effect today. The actions, practices, and deeds of the Islamic Republic of Iran are profoundly illegitimate and illegal under both international law and international conventions, not to mention the many human rights abuses it perpetrates. Numerous examples of these abuses have been brought here by committed collectives such as the Iranian Justice Collective and corroborated by our friends Nazanin Afshinjan and Mr. Degan, and they are also corroborated by the many testimonies of others who are present. Since its creation in 1979, the CGRI, or rather the IRGC, has seen its power grow significantly. Originally, it was a military organization founded to protect the revolutionary values of 1979. Its independence from the traditional Iranian army has enabled it to become an influential and formidable armed force. The IRGC is not just a military force. It is also deeply involved in Iran's economy, politics, and Iranian intelligence services. This reinforcement of its means of action and influence make it a key player in the Iranian political landscape. The IRGC has become a real power within Iran. It controls key sectors of the economy, notably the oil and gas industries, and it owns numerous companies through front companies. It also plays a central role in suppressing internal dissent and projecting Iranian influence abroad, supporting various non-state groups in the region. Today, the Iranian people are courageously fighting against the forced Islamization of society, an ideology which, despite the efforts of the IRGC, has partly failed. The struggle, Women, Life, Freedom, is a poignant illustration of this. This struggle for freedom and human rights is not only vital for Iran, but also has repercussions for the whole region and the world. The Islamization by force is a terror that weighs heavily, threatening peace and stability, not only in Iran and the Middle East, but also in Europe and the rest of the world, as witnessed by the repeated attacks and hostage-taking of Western nationals. In conclusion, it is imperative to actively support the Iranian people in their fight against this oppressive ideology. The future also depends on your political and institutional capacity to highlight the illegitimacy and illegality of the Iranian regime before all international and national bodies. Your role as defenders of democratic and humanitarian values can considerably strengthen the ability of Iranian men and women to overcome this state repression and establish a political system that respects human rights and fundamental freedoms. The international community must stand resolutely by those fighting for a free and democratic Iran, vigorously condemning human rights violations and applying targeted sanctions against the perpetrators. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. We now turn to the members for their questions. I should say it's more in the nature of rapid-fire questions, given some of the time constraints we have. So for the first round, each member will be provided 3 minutes, and we start off with MP Hoback.
It's going to have to be very quick here. Ms. Hanai, I'm just kind of curious, one of the things that we've seen is these bad actors are showing up here in Canada. What can we do to actually deal with these bad actors when they're on Canadian soil? Well, how do we identify them? How do we work with the community to identify them? And then should they just be deported, or should they actually face trial here in Canada when they are intimidating Iranian citizens and diaspora here in Canada? Did we lose her? Ms. Hanai?
Dr. Ziai?
Oui, merci.
Yes, thank you for the question. I believe Ms. Nazanin Afzinjam spoke quite eloquently about this and about the importance of things like data with photos and names. And I think the Government of Canada also has means to identify those individuals who are on Canadian territory. And it's made easier with digital technology. And the fact that people are coming to this area means they can be identified. Obviously, that requires a cooperation because there are many people collecting this kind of data. I think this work has to be done in common and shared, and by the kind of work that Ms. Nazanin Afzinjam pointed out during her testimony. That work has to be done on a regular basis in the short, medium, and long term. So that is something that is extremely important. So it has to be done over time. And I think that the Iranian diaspora can be an ally for the Government of Canada.
I want to make sure that there's a system in place so if somebody's facing threats and intimidation, either here in Canada or their family members back in Iran, that gets identified and there's actually a mechanism to deal with that. I'm running out of time here, so I guess, I'm sitting here trying to figure out why this IRGC isn't a terrorist organization. I cannot see why this hasn't happened yet. Can anybody give me some insight into what's holding things up? Like, this is crazy. Nina?
Alors,
Well, we don't understand either. My colleague gave reasons earlier. The government says that if it puts the IRGC on the terrorist list, then perhaps they might end up overreaching in terms of their punishments. So there are people that will be unfairly sanctioned. However, there are already sanctions against Iran. Transactions are restricted, for example. And people from the IRGC come with a lot of money. They can get through. However, there are those also who can be there are others who can be stopped with less means. You know, for example, an artist or another individual. So we have to use the right means to get the right people.
Thank you. Yes, you're well over the 3 minutes. We now go to MP Oliphant. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses in both panels. It's always helpful. I'm going to turn to the families of the PS 752 group. Just to give you notice that I may be asking our committee to bring you back because I think your work is critical to Canada's commitment in the world. So I'd hoped you to be in more of our accountability session, but I do want to give you a chance to say a few more things. I want to talk particularly about the experience of foreign influence on family members, survivors, as well as activists in Canada who may have spoken out against the regime in Canada. And it could be either Hamid or I never use your last names, Hamid or Koresh, to speak to that. Thank you. You have the rest of my time to talk about this.
Okay. So if I may, you know, as I testified in the Foreign Interference Commission a few months ago, I think we need to believe in the extent of foreign interference of the Islamic regime in Canada. This is the first step that we have to take. I gave an example there. So we have a former banker of Islamic regime, Mahmoud Reza Khavari in Canada. We had the former chief of police, Murtaza Talai in Canada. We had the former minister of health, Qazizadeh Hashemi in Canada last summer, who intimidated and who threatened the families of PS752. He said, when I go back, their actions would be retaliated. So we had the current Speaker of the House of the regime, the man who got nominated for presidency today in Iran. His son applied to come to Canada a few months ago, and he started a lawsuit against the Canadian government that why you are not fast enough to accept me as an immigrant here in this country. So, as I said, the former banker, the former chief of police, the former minister, the Speaker of the House, and who is next? I'm not getting surprised if I see the Supreme Leader of Iran walking in the streets of Toronto anymore, you know. This can happen any day. And when we are talking about hundreds of them, this is just the peak of the iceberg. I think none of you would be comfortable if you know, for example, the son of the current Speaker of the House is your neighbor in Canada. And the chief of the police was working out in a gym 2 kilometers from my house. 3 kilometers from where my wife and my daughter are buried because of PS752. Do you feel safe in this condition? I don't think so. So I want to talk about money laundering as well. So if you go to a lot of currency exchanges stores that we have north of Toronto, and if you supervise them, you will see the amount of money that comes to Canada for money laundering from IRGC. And that's why we don't feel safe in this country. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, that is time, Mr. Oliphant, I'm afraid. So now we go to Mr. Bergeron. You have 3 minutes, sir.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chair. My question is for Ms. Yayi. You spoke about the enthusiasm after the accidental death of the president in the helicopter that happened on the 19th of May last. So there will be elections on the 28th of June. But you also referred to the low turnout in elections. So what is your forecast of might happen? There could be a contradiction between this enthusiasm over the death of the president and the turnout of the election. So what do you expect to see on June 28th? Well, there could be a fair amount of absenteeism. They may not want to necessarily turn out, even though they are not happy with the Iranian regime. Now, there might be other kinds of demonstrations as well. There might be other types of protests at the time of the elections. The main issue over the following weeks, months, and years will be that of succession over the leader. And so it's possible that the president's position really was a launching pad for the replacement of, eventually, of the Ayatollah. So we don't know what will happen, but it is the supreme leader that has full power over all arms of the government. He is at the summit of institutional power in Iran. Do I have any time left, Chair?
Alors, j'aimerais revenir.
Then I'd like to come back quickly to the elections. So you said what might happen on the 28th, but what could happen after the 28th? For example, could there be some sort of revolution, or could it just be a confirmation of the continuity of power in place? Well, as we've seen during presidential elections, there isn't really true change that occurs. They are a clan. They're a very closed political group. So there are some distinctions made between reformists and conservatives, for example. However, nobody challenges the system. No one is challenging the Islamic Republic. And that's why they're losing their legitimacy, and that's why the Iranian population want a definitive change. They don't want to just move from one conservative leader to another conservative leader.
We next go to MP McPherson. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your testimony. It is so horrific to hear the gender apartheid, the instances we're seeing, the repression, the pain that you must feel. Sir, to have your wife and child be so close to somebody who was responsible for their deaths is appalling, absolutely appalling. I apologize that has happened to you. You know, this study is meant to look at why the IRGC is not being listed as a terrorist entity. What is the reasons that the government has given? Obviously, we've heard from the member from the Conservatives. He doesn't understand. We don't understand. Dr. Mashouf, you've told us that you don't understand why this hasn't happened. Can you take some time to tell us what it would mean to the Iranian community in Canada if the IRGC was listed as a terrorist entity? What would that mean for you and for people across this country?
Merci pour la question.
Well, thank you for the question. It would mean more security. My colleagues have already said that the goal of the IRGC is to maintain the Islamic revolution and export it elsewhere. And my colleagues have spoken to this. There have been many attacks against opponents. There are about 540 over the past 40 years. So these are assassinations outside Iran by the Iranian government through their arm. Now, fortunately, some of these assassinations have failed, but there are many threats. I asked people for examples of threats, people who've come here. You know, who has been threatened? Because you hear about people being threatened and not feeling safe. And I did receive messages from students in Toronto, for example. They said that several of them have received threatening calls. For example, that they have their photographs and their addresses. And they have also said that they'll threaten their families and call in their families if they participate in protests. So, when they can't find the person in question, then they go for the families. They've also said, forget being able to return to the country. But if you do decide to return to the country, we'll be happy to have you here. So these are these kinds of threats that they're receiving. And there are others. In Montreal, there was another threat against a teacher at McGill, a professor at McGill, who was pleased that the Iranian government was going to eliminate opponents. But so there were other forms of threats. There are Iranian diplomats who have been arrested in Belgium and who have been sentenced to 20 years in prison. But in one particular case, they were exchanged between governments, between the Iranian and the Belgian government. So people feel threatened. Everyone feels threatened.
Thank you. For the next question, we go to MP Chattel. MP Chattel, you have 2 minutes.
Merci. Thank you very much, Chair. And I'd like to put my question to Ms. Ziai. After the death of Masajina Amini, the population rose up, and there was hope that human rights might change. What do you think Canada and the international community could do? What kind of measures could they adopt to support human rights, but also to support democratic movements within the country? Earlier, you referred to targeted sanctions, to strengthening the ability of Iranians to have their rights defended and supported. So perhaps more concretely, what would you suggest? I think the interpreter apologized, but the sound quality is deteriorating. The service will have to be interrupted because the sound quality does not allow for interpretation.
Intellectuels, des journalistes qui sont dans les prisons iraniennes. Ces gens-là ne devraient pas être en prison. On ne devrait pas avoir ce type de profil dans les prisons. C'est devenu une maison culturelle. La prison d'Evin est devenue une maison culturelle. Vous n'avez pas des criminels à l'intérieur.
Dr. Ziai, I sincerely apologize for interrupting. There wasn't much time left anyways, but the interpretation was on and off. So if you could graciously provide a response to MP Chattel's question in writing and submit it to us, we would be very, very grateful indeed. Sorry about that, but the translation has been experiencing some problems. So we now go to Mr. Abel-Taif. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Question to Mr. Ismailian. You mentioned the money laundering situation. It's, I'm sure we're probably aware of many of aspects of it's happening. In which areas you believe that the regime, the IRGC, is performing the type of money laundering in Canada, and how severe that, if you have any assessment to give us, that would be good for the report. Thank you.
So I think the majority of this money goes to real estate in Canada, especially in big cities like Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal. And, you know, it's like, you know, among Iranians, when there's somebody involved in corruption, usually they say, okay, we will find him in Vancouver next month. This is something that, this is a saying among Iranians inside the country. But let me give you an example. A friend of mine, like 2 or 3 years ago, he decided to bring all his savings from Iran. And he wanted to declare that to CRA. So when he asked the currency exchange store that okay, how should I declare that to the CRA? So the answer was, what's the point? I bring millions of dollars every day, and there's no consequences, and there's no investigation or supervision. So I think it would be the good answer for your question.
Thank you. We now go to Mr. Bergeron. I apologize, but you only have a minute, so it should be a very rapid question.
Question express.
Quick question then for Professor Ziai. Iran is presiding or presided over Human Rights Council in 2023, despite its terrible record. Canada announced its intention to be a candidate in 2030. Do you think this is relevant given the quality or the credibility of the Council, given that Iran's participation? Well, I'll say on behalf of the Iranians, this choice was criticized. We didn't expect this to happen. I mean, it's the height of a paradox for this kind of country to be at the head of that committee. So what is going to happen? What will be on the table? Are they going to approve the fact that artists and journalists are being tortured psychologically, etc.? I mean, all the types of torture was referred to. What are they going to talk about? Are they going to talk about these cases? I'd like to know. What's going to be on the table? What's going to be discussed and negotiated when you have that sort of country chairing this committee?
And now we go for the final question to MP McPherson. Again, my apologies. You only get 1 minute.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Asmialian, you know that many people that died in PS 752, we had many from Edmonton, Strathcona. So I'll put the same question to you that I did just ask Dr. Mashouf. What would be the impacts on the families if the IRGC was listed as a terrorist organization?
2 weeks ago in Iran, my parents, my father is 75, my mom is 74, so now they are banned to leave the country and travel to Canada. It happens like 6 months ago when they decided to come to the 4th anniversary. 2 weeks ago in Iran, they went to their house, 3 plainclothes officers, and they summoned them to go to intelligence service. So my father had to answer the questions related to my activities here. So this is just one example of hundreds of families. And as others, my colleagues said today, we don't really understand why the IRGC is not on the list, because I think the impact is great on the families. I mean, then we see that our government is doing something. And sometimes we hear that they're worried about safety of Canadians, but they already killed Canadians. They already did.
Thank you very much. That concludes all the questions. I wanted to take this opportunity to speak on behalf of all the members. We're very, very grateful for your attendance here today and for your incredibly helpful testimony. Thank you, Dr. Mashouf. Thank you, Dr. Ismailian. Thank you, Dr. Ziai. And thank you very much, Mr. Duchenos.